The morning sunlight filtered softly through the lace curtains, spilling across the worn wooden table where I sat with my crossword puzzle and a half-finished cup of tea. The kettle still hissed faintly on the stove, the sound blending with the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Life had slowed to a rhythm I had grown used to, quiet, predictable, almost fragile in its simplicity. Retirement hadn't been what I once imagined. There were no trips abroad, no fancy hobbies or golf clubs. Instead, my world had shrunk to this small house on Maple Street, the one my wife and I bought nearly 40 years ago. After she passed, it became both my refuge and my cage. I filled my days with simple routines: morning tea, tending the garden, a short walk to the market, evenings with the radio humming low. My pension, modest as it was, kept me afloat. Every check that arrived in the mail reminded me of the decades I had spent in the factory, my hands calloused from machinery, my back aching from double shifts. I had worked myself down to the bone so that one day I might rest. And though money was tight, it was mine. It was proof that my life's labor had meant something. Sometimes in the quiet of the afternoon, I would find myself speaking aloud to my late wife, Evelyn. Her photograph sat on the mantel, her eyes forever warm, her smile a balm even after all these years. "I'm doing all right," I'd tell her. "The house is standing. The garden's holding up. You'd laugh at how lopsided the tomatoes are this year." It comforted me to imagine she was still here, watching over me. But loneliness has a way of seeping into the corners, even when you try to ignore it. The silence stretched long some evenings, pressing heavy against my chest. I told myself I had grown accustomed to it, but deep down I longed for company, even if I never admitted it aloud. That company came, though not in the way I expected. It was a Tuesday when Jacob, my only son, called out of the blue. His voice, once so familiar, carried a note of urgency I couldn't place. "Dad," he said quickly, "I've hit a rough patch. Lost my job. Things are complicated. I was wondering if I could stay with you for a while." My first instinct was relief. My boy, grown now but always my boy, was coming home. Memories flooded back of when he was small, racing through this very kitchen, his laughter bouncing off the walls. I thought of the nights Evelyn and I stayed up late, saving every penny so he could go to college, so his future would be brighter than ours. "Of course," I said without hesitation, "this is your home too. Come whenever you need." I cleaned the guest room that night, freshened the sheets, even set out one of Evelyn's old quilts. A strange excitement stirred in me, something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe this was a blessing in disguise. Maybe the silence would finally lift. The next day, Jacob arrived with 2 suitcases and a tired smile. He hugged me quickly, more a formality than affection, and glanced around the house as though assessing it. I tried not to notice. Instead, I clapped him on the shoulder. "It's good to have you home, son." He nodded, his eyes already on his phone. "Yeah, thanks, Dad." That night, as I watched him settle in, I felt a mixture of pride and unease. Pride, because he was still my son, flesh of my flesh, the boy Evelyn and I had raised with hope. Unease, because something in his demeanor was different, harder, sharper, as though the years had carved away the warmth I once knew. Still, I told myself not to worry. He was going through a difficult time. Surely being here would help him find his footing again. I didn't know then how quickly the peace of my quiet mornings would unravel, or how the son I welcomed back with open arms would soon test the very boundaries of my trust, my patience, and my dignity. For now, though, as I lay in bed listening to the creaks of the old house and the faint sound of Jacob's footsteps in the hall, I let myself believe this was a new beginning, that perhaps after years of solitude I would finally have family under this roof again. It never crossed my mind that opening my door that day would be the beginning of a storm that would threaten everything I had left. Jacob's presence filled the house in ways I had forgotten. At first, I found comfort in the sound of another voice echoing through the hallway, the slam of the refrigerator door, the heavy footsteps on the stairs. For so long the house had been nothing but silence and memory. Now there was movement, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. He unpacked quickly, his belongings spilling into the guest room with little care. Clothes draped across the chair, shoes piled in a corner, the faint scent of cologne clinging to the air. I said nothing. After all, it was only temporary. He needed space to breathe, to recover from whatever storm had driven him back home. The first evening we ate dinner together at the kitchen table, something I hadn't done with anyone in years, I made roast chicken with potatoes, the way Evelyn used to. Jacob barely looked up from his phone as he ate, but I didn't mind. Just having him there, sitting across from me, was enough. "How long do you think you'll stay?" I asked gently, trying not to sound intrusive. He shrugged without lifting his eyes. "Depends. Until I get back on my feet, I guess. Shouldn't be long." I nodded, offering a smile. "Take whatever time you need. You're always welcome here." He gave a faint grunt of acknowledgement, more distracted than grateful. I pushed the thought aside. It was only the first day. Adjusting would take time. The days slipped into a new rhythm. In the mornings, I still made my tea and worked through my crossword, though now the sounds of Jacob waking late and stumbling into the kitchen added to the routine. He rarely joined me for breakfast, preferring coffee grabbed on the run or food delivered to the door. In the evenings, I'd cook while he sprawled on the couch, scrolling endlessly, the flicker of his phone screen casting sharp light across his tired face. I tried to start conversations about sports, about the neighborhood, about memories of his childhood, but most ended in short replies. He seemed always somewhere else, his mind preoccupied with things he didn't share. Still, there were moments that softened me. One night he came home looking worn down, his shoulders slumped, his eyes shadowed. He sat at the table and ate in silence. I wanted to ask what burden he carried, but instead I said, "You'll figure it out, Jacob. You always do." For the briefest second he looked at me, really looked, and the hardness in his eyes flickered. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe." But just as quickly the wall returned. Within a week, subtle patterns emerged. He left dishes in the sink for me to wash. He borrowed cash for small things, but never paid it back. He used my car without asking, leaving the tank nearly empty. Little irritations, I told myself, harmless. After all, he was adjusting, and I was his father. Fathers were supposed to be patient. One evening, I found him sitting in the living room with papers spread across the coffee table. Pamphlets about financial management, printouts about retirement planning, words like guardianship and account access bolded on the pages. "What's all this?" I asked, surprised. He looked up casually. "Just stuff I was reading. You know, Dad, you're not getting any younger. Managing money can get complicated. Maybe I should help you keep track of things, just to make life easier." The suggestion caught me off guard. My pension had always been mine to manage. Evelyn and I had been careful savers, and though the amount wasn't large, it was enough for me to live simply. I had never needed help before. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but I've managed just fine." He smiled faintly, but there was something in his eyes, sharp, calculating. "Sure, just think about it." That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought of Evelyn again. Would she have seen what I was starting to feel? There was a shift in Jacob's tone, a subtle edge that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just a son seeking refuge. He was looking at my life, my pension, my security, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he wanted something more than just a place to stay. The quiet mornings I once cherished had changed. They were no longer mine alone. The house hummed with Jacob's presence, and though part of me clung to the joy of having him close, another part whispered caution. I didn't yet know how deep that caution would need to run. For now, I told myself, patience was enough, but patience can only stretch so far before it begins to break. At first, the changes were so small, I almost ignored them. Jacob would ask for a few dollars here and there, always framed as temporary, always with the promise of repayment that never came. A grocery bill short by 20, a ride share he couldn't pay. "I'll square it up next week, Dad," he'd say, flashing a tired smile before slipping out the door. I told myself it was harmless. I was his father. Fathers helped their sons, didn't they? Evelyn would have urged compassion, but as the weeks unfolded, the requests multiplied. Each was wrapped in casual tones, but I could feel the weight behind them. One Saturday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, working through the crossword. Jacob walked in, hair mussed from sleep, phone in hand. He dropped into the chair across from me, his voice light but deliberate. "Dad, I need to borrow your debit card for a couple of days, just until my new one comes in." I set down my pencil and studied him. "What happened to your card?" He shrugged. "Bank issue. Fraud alert or something. They're sending me a new one. Should be here by Tuesday." I hesitated, my mind flicking back to the envelopes of bills Evelyn and I had once kept tucked away in the drawer, safe and accounted for. "I'd rather not hand over my card, Jacob. But if you need groceries, I'll go with you. We can get what you need together." He leaned back, annoyance flashing across his face before he covered it with a forced smile. "You don't trust me with a card? It's just a couple days. You act like I'd drain your account." His words lingered long after he left the room. Trust, the one thing that should have been unshakable between us now, felt fragile, as though each request chipped away at the foundation. The following week, new pamphlets appeared on the counter, articles about financial guardianship and senior money management. They hadn't come from my mail. They were printed from Jacob's computer, the ink still fresh. I picked one up, scanning phrases that made my stomach tighten. Appointing a trusted family member, avoiding costly mistakes, protecting assets in old age. When Jacob returned that evening, I held the pamphlet up. "Did you put this here?" He didn't even look ashamed. "Yeah, just something to think about. You're not exactly 25 anymore, Dad. Bills, accounts, insurance. It's a lot to juggle. Wouldn't it be easier if I handled it for you?" I stared at him, the words catching in my throat. For decades, I had managed this household, paid every bill on time, kept food on the table, raised him through lean years when every dollar mattered, and now he was suggesting I wasn't capable. That age had eroded the very skills that had built his childhood. "I can manage my own finances," I said firmly, placing the pamphlet back on the counter. He gave a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Sure, but sooner or later you'll realize it's too much." That night, I sat by the fireplace with Evelyn's photograph in my hands. "Would you believe this?" I whispered to her frozen smile. "Our boy, the same one we saved for, the one we wanted a better life for, now treating me like a liability." My voice cracked as the fire popped and hissed. "I don't know what happened to him, Eve. I don't know where we went wrong. But in my heart, I knew this wasn't just a phase. It was a path he had chosen, one built not on gratitude, but on expectation. The small requests were not small at all. They were stepping stones, leading to something larger, something I wasn't sure I wanted to face. Still, I told myself it was too soon to judge. He was struggling. People said desperate times made men act differently. Perhaps, I thought, this was temporary. Perhaps he would find his footing again. Yet even as I tried to convince myself, I remembered the flicker in his eyes when he spoke of managing my money. It wasn't just concern, it was hunger. And hunger, if fed, only grows. The house had changed, though not in its bones. The same clock ticked in the hallway. The same wallpaper Evelyn once picked still clung stubbornly to the kitchen walls. But the air was different now. It felt heavier, like the weight of unspoken words lingered in every corner. I would sit in my chair by the window, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes down Maple Street, and I would remember a time when Jacob was one of them. He had once pedaled furiously on a second-hand bicycle, cheeks flushed, laughter trailing behind him. Back then, his eyes had been filled with wonder, not calculation. His laughter had rung with joy, not tension. Now that boy seemed like a stranger. As I watched Jacob move about the house, I noticed things I hadn't before. The way his eyes darted to the drawer where I kept my checkbook. The way his fingers lingered on the stack of mail, sifting through it as though searching for something. The way he frowned when I mentioned paying bills on time, as though the very idea of responsibility weighed on him. It unsettled me. One evening I found myself leafing through an old photo album. The pictures told stories of birthday cakes, baseball games, family vacations in the beat-up station wagon we could barely afford. Evelyn had always been there, her arm wrapped around us, her smile steady. Jacob, small and grinning, stood at my side in every frame. I traced a finger along his young face in one photograph, his first day of high school. His tie was crooked, his hair a mess, but his smile had been bright. He had hugged me that morning, thanking me for working extra shifts to buy him new shoes. I remembered the pride in my chest, the belief that all the sacrifices were worth it. Where had that boy gone? The Jacob living under my roof now was a man in years, but not in spirit. His charm felt hollow, his gratitude rehearsed. He came and went at odd hours, his phone glued to, his conversations hushed and urgent. Sometimes I would catch snippets. "I'll pay you back soon," or "I'm working on it. Just give me time." His voice held the same edge I had heard when he asked for my card. Doubt crept into me like a shadow, stretching longer with each passing day. I wanted to believe his hardships were temporary, that he was simply lost and searching for direction, but in my heart I wondered if there was more, if debts or bad choices had carved this hardness into him. The turning point came late one night. I had gone to bed early, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sometime past midnight, a noise stirred me awake. I slipped from my bed and padded into the hallway, careful not to creak the floorboards. There, in the faint glow of the living room lamp, stood Jacob. He was hunched over my desk, rifling through drawers. My checkbook lay open beside him. "Jacob," I said softly. He jerked upright, his face pale. "Dad, I was just looking for a pen. Needed to write something down." I stared at him, my heart pounding. His lie hung in the air, flimsy and transparent. "The pens are in the jar by the phone," I replied evenly. He forced a laugh, too quick, too forced. "Right, I forgot." He closed the drawer and shuffled out of the room, avoiding my gaze. I stood there long after he left, staring at the open checkbook. The doubt that had been whispering in the corners of my mind now screamed. My son wasn't just careless or entitled. He was watching, waiting, circling like a hawk for the right moment to swoop. The next morning I tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, but the seed of mistrust had taken root. Every glance, every word from Jacob now carried a double meaning. Was he asking out of need, or was he scheming? I confided in Evelyn's photograph again that night. "He's slipping, Eve," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "I don't know how to reach him any more. I don't know if he even wants to be reached." The doubt consumed me, winding tighter each day, and deep down I knew the moment was coming when Jacob would stop hinting, stop asking politely, and finally show me the full extent of what he wanted. And when that day came, I would have to decide whether to stand firm or to lose everything I had fought my whole life to protect. It happened on a Thursday evening, the kind of night where the sky hung heavy with rain but never released it, the air thick and restless. I had just finished supper and was clearing the plates when Jacob walked into the kitchen. His expression was tight, his jaw set, the kind of look I remembered from his teenage years when he thought the world owed him something. "Dad," he began, his voice too casual to be genuine, "we need to talk about your pension." The words made me pause, the dish still in my hand. "My pension?" I repeated, carefully setting the plate in the sink. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Yeah. Look, you've done fine managing it so far, but things are changing. You're not as sharp as you used to be. No offense. It would make sense for me to step in, just to make sure everything's handled properly." I stared at him, my heart thudding in my chest. I've been handling it just fine, Jacob. For years he waved a hand, dismissing my words as if they carried no weight. Sure, but for how much longer? You don't want to make mistakes, right? Bills get forgotten, scams happen, people your age get taken advantage of all the time. If I had access, I could make sure none of that happens. I felt heat rising in my face. You want access to my pension account? Exactly, he said quickly, as though it were the most natural solution in the world. Think of it as protection. I'd be managing it for you, keeping you safe. Honestly, it's irresponsible not to let me help. The gall of his words stunned me. I thought of Evelyn, how she and I had pinched pennies to build a life from nothing. Every check I received now was a reminder of our sacrifices, our endurance. And here was my son, not asking but insisting that I hand it over as though it were his birthright. No, I said firmly. His eyes narrowed. What do you mean, no? I mean exactly that. Number my pension is mine. I earned it. I don't need you managing it. His voice rose, sharp and biting. You don't trust me? I'm your son, for God's sake. Who else would you trust if not me? The kitchen seemed smaller then, his anger filling the room like a storm. I kept my voice steady. This isn't about trust, Jacob. It's about responsibility. That money is all I have. It's not yours to touch. He slammed his hand on the counter, making the dishes rattle. You're being stubborn. Do you think you can keep track of it forever? You're old, Dad. You're not invincible. One day you'll screw up, and then what? At least with me, it stays in the family. His words cut deep, not because of their truth, but because of their cruelty. I felt suddenly small in my own kitchen, the home I had built now filled with hostility. I said no, I repeated, my voice quieter but resolute. For a long moment he just stood there, his eyes boring into mine. Then he let out a bitter laugh. Fine. Be that way. But don't come crying to me when you mess it all up. He stormed out, the door to the guest room slamming so hard the picture frames on the wall trembled. I stood alone in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I gripped the counter. I had known this day was coming. Every small request, every pamphlet, every sidelong glance at my checkbook, it had all been leading here. The demand had finally been spoken aloud, and my refusal had drawn a line in the sand. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Jacob wasn't the kind of man to back down quietly. He would push harder, lean heavier, until either I broke or he did. That night, I sat by Evelyn's photograph again, my voice barely above a whisper. He's not the boy you knew, Eve. He's different, and I don't know how much longer I can hold him off. The storm outside finally broke, rain lashing against the windows. As I listened to it pound the glass, I realized the storm inside my home was only just beginning. The air in the house grew tense after that night, thick with unspoken words and simmering resentment. Jacob moved through the rooms like a storm cloud, his footsteps heavy, his sighs exaggerated. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried an edge sharp enough to cut. At first, I tried to smooth things over. I offered to cook his favorite meals, asked about his job search, even suggested we work on small projects around the house together. He brushed me off every time. One morning, as I sat with my crossword and tea, he came in, slamming a stack of unopened mail on the table. You haven't paid this yet. I looked down. It was the electric bill, still sealed. That's not due until next week, I said evenly. He scoffed, pacing the kitchen. You're already slipping. You can't just let this stuff pile up. What happens when you forget something important? What happens when they cut you off? I folded the paper calmly and set it aside. Jacob, I've managed bills for 40 years. I don't need lectures. His laugh was bitter, mocking. 40 years ago, sure, but you're not the same man anymore. The words stung more than I cared to admit. I kept my face steady, but inside, something twisted. My son, the boy Evelyn and I raised with hope, was now treating me like a burden, as though my age had erased the years of sacrifice that put him through school and kept a roof over his head. In the evenings, the arguments became more heated. He would corner me in the kitchen, his voice rising as he circled the subject of my pension again and again. "You're sitting on money you don't even use," he shouted one night. "What's the point of it just sitting there while you scrape by? I could invest it, double it, make sure we both have security." "It's not for us both," I replied firmly. "It's for me, for the life I worked for," he sneered, his face contorting. "Selfish. That's what you are. You'd rather hoard it than help your own son." The venom in his tone shocked me. This wasn't desperation anymore. It was entitlement. He believed he deserved my pension, as though it were a gift waiting for him to claim. That night, I locked my checkbook in the small safe in my closet. It wasn't much, just a fireproof box with a key, but it gave me some measure of reassurance. I even called the bank the next day, quietly asking about alerts for unusual activity. The clerk on the phone was kind, her voice soft with concern. "It's always wise to be cautious, Mr. Collins," she said. "Family or not." Her words haunted me. Family or not. I had always believed blood bound us together, that no matter how far Jacob strayed, he would still be my son. But now I wasn't so sure. The tension escalated until even the neighbors noticed. Mrs. Henderson from next door pulled me aside one afternoon while I was trimming the hedges. "Everything all right, Harold?" she asked, her eyes flicking toward the house. "I hear a lot of shouting these days." I forced a smile, brushing off her concern. "Just family matters," I said. But inside, I was unraveling. One night, after another heated argument, where Jacob accused me of being paranoid, I sat in the darkened living room, long after he had gone to bed. The house creaked around me, shadows stretching across the walls. For the first time, I admitted aloud what I had been too afraid to say, even to myself. I don't trust my own son anymore. The words hung in the air like a confession. I thought of Evelyn, of the promise we made to always look after Jacob, no matter what. But what happens when the one you swore to protect turns into the one you need protection from? The escalation was no longer about requests or pamphlets. Jacob's temper was boiling over, his patience thinning. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his footsteps, feel it in the way he slammed doors harder each day. I knew something was coming, something worse than words, and deep down I feared that when it came, I might not be ready. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning, though looking back, I suppose it had been building for weeks. The arguments, the glares, the constant tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to strike, every piece had been falling into place. I was in the kitchen making my usual tea. The kettle whistled as steam curled up into the air. I placed 2 slices of bread into the toaster, humming faintly to myself in an attempt to keep the mood calm. The house had felt like a battlefield lately, and I was desperate for even a moment of peace. Jacob entered suddenly, his footsteps hard against the floor. He looked disheveled, eyes bloodshot, hair unkempt. His phone was in his hand, clenched tightly as if it held bad news. Without a word, he yanked open the fridge, grabbed a carton of milk, and drank straight from it. I watched him silently, setting down my cup. "Rough night?" I asked gently. He slammed the carton back onto the shelf, turning toward me with a glare. "Don't start, Dad." I kept my tone even. "I'm not starting anything, just asking." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "Asking. Always asking. You want the truth? I'm drowning here. Debts, bills, everything piling up. And you sit here sipping tea with money tucked away like some dragon hoarding gold." My chest tightened. "That money isn't hoarded, Jacob. It's my pension, my survival. Without it, I have nothing." His face twisted, anger flashing in his eyes. "Nothing? You've got a house, food, security. You don't understand what it's like out there. I need help, real help, and you could give it to me if you weren't so damn selfish." Before I could respond, he marched across the kitchen and yanked open the drawer where I kept my grocery envelope, cash I set aside each week. His hand closed around it, the bills crumpling in his fist. "Jacob!" I shouted, moving toward him. "Put that back!" He spun on me, eyes wild. "Why? So you can sit here alone, guarding every dime? I'm your son, Dad. I deserve this more than you do." The words hit harder than a fist. I deserve this more than you. I grabbed his wrist, my voice trembling with fury. "You don't deserve a cent of it. I worked for that money. Every hour in that factory, every ache in my back, every callus on my hands, that was for me, for your mother, for this family, not for you to tear apart." For a moment, we stood locked in a silent struggle, father and son staring each other down. His grip tightened on the envelope, my hand refusing to let go. I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him, see the desperation carved into every line of his face. Finally, he ripped his hand free, shoving the envelope back into the drawer with a snarl. "Fine, keep your damn money, but don't expect me to sit here and watch you waste it," he stormed out, the slam of the front door shaking the walls. I stood there, my breath ragged, my hands trembling as I clutched the edge of the counter. My heart pounded, not just from anger, but from sorrow. This was no longer about helping him. This was about control, about greed. For the first time, I wasn't just afraid of losing my money. I was afraid of losing my son entirely. That night, the house was eerily quiet. I sat in my chair, staring at Evelyn's photograph, tears blurring my vision. "Did we fail him?" I whispered. "Did we give him too much, or not enough? How did he become this?" The silence gave no answers, but one thing was clear. The line had been crossed. Jacob had shown me what he was capable of, and if I didn't stand firm now, I would lose, not just my pension, but my dignity, my home, and everything I had left. I went to bed with a heavy heart, but also with a new resolve forming deep inside me. The next time Jacob came for what was mine, I would be ready. The days after Jacob's outburst felt like walking on thin ice. The house was quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that hummed with tension, like a coiled spring, ready to snap. We barely spoke, our conversations reduced to clipped phrases and passing glares. I spent more time in my room, locking important papers in the safe, double-checking my pension statements, making sure every envelope of cash was tucked away. It was exhausting, living in constant vigilance within the walls of my own home. One evening, I was sitting in the living room with the news humming faintly on the television when Jacob came in. His shoulders were squared, his jaw tight, his phone clutched in his hand as though it had delivered him more bad news. He stood in the doorway, watching me for a long moment before speaking. "This can't go on, Dad." I muted the television and looked up. "What do you mean?" He stepped inside, pacing the floor. "I can't live like this, begging for scraps while you sit on a pension that could change everything. I've been patient, but you're leaving me no choice. Either you give me access to your accounts, or I'll find another way." The threat hung in the air like smoke. My chest tightened, but instead of fear, something else rose within me. Anger. Not the quiet, festering kind I had swallowed for weeks, but sharp, clear, righteous anger. I stood slowly, setting aside the remote. "Another way?" I repeated, my voice steady. He smirked, though his eyes flickered with unease. "Don't test me, Dad. You think I don't know where you keep things? That safe upstairs? You're not as clever as you think." For a moment, I simply stared at him. The boy I had once cradled in my arms now standing before me as a stranger, a threat. Something broke inside me then, not my spirit, but the last shred of illusion that this was temporary, that he would turn himself around if I just waited. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze. "Listen to me, Jacob. You may be my son, but you are not my master. That pension, this house, everything in it, I earned with my own 2 hands. Your mother and I went without so you could have more, and now you stand here like a thief, demanding what you haven't earned." His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. I pressed on, my voice rising with every word. You call me old, weak, slipping, but I have carried this family longer than you've been alive, and I will not, do you hear me? I will not hand over my dignity, to you or anyone. He clenched his fists, his face red with frustration. You don't understand. I'm drowning. I need that money. I shook my head, my voice firm. What you need is discipline, responsibility, and the courage to fix your own mistakes. Taking from me will not save you. It will only destroy whatever is left of us. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the muted television. Jacob's chest heaved as he glared at me, his anger clashing against the steel in my voice. Then, with a sharp movement, he turned and stormed out, the front door slamming so hard the windows rattled. I stood there, my hands trembling, but not from fear. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than despair. I felt my own strength return. That night, I changed the locks. I called the bank again, set up new alerts, even spoke to a lawyer about power of attorney, not to grant it, but to protect against it. I took every step I could to safeguard what was mine, because I knew Jacob would be back. And when he returned, I would not be caught unprepared. For years I had lived as though my best days were behind me, as though age had stolen my strength. But standing in that quiet house, the echo of my own words still ringing in my ears, I realized something. Strength is not measured by youth, but by resolve, and my resolve had never been stronger. Jacob didn't come home that night, nor the next. For 2 days the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the peace I remembered from before. It was a heavy silence filled with unease. Every sound outside, a car slowing near the curb, footsteps on the sidewalk, made me tense, waiting for the storm of his return. But Jacob didn't return. On the 3rd day, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but the caller ID flashed a local number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, firm but not unkind, greeted me. Mr. Collins, this is Officer Ramirez. Your son Jacob was involved in a dispute downtown. Nothing criminal, but it seems he's having some difficulties. I closed my eyes, my hand tightening around the receiver. Difficulties. That word barely scratched the surface. I thanked her and hung up, but the pit in my stomach only deepened. Difficulties meant debt collectors. It meant unpaid bills, broken promises, bridges burned. I imagined Jacob's face, red with anger, lashing out at anyone who stood in his way, just as he had with me. By the end of the week, the truth began to seep out. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that she'd seen Jacob arguing with a man outside the house before he disappeared. Later, the mail brought notices addressed to him, overdue credit accounts, final warnings from banks, even a letter threatening legal action. He hadn't just been drowning, he was sinking fast. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer some lifeline. He was still my son, after all. But another part of me remembered the fire in his eyes, the way he had called me selfish for refusing to hand him everything I had left. Helping him now would not save him. It would only feed the flames of his recklessness. The days stretched into weeks. Jacob appeared only sporadically, usually late at night, his footsteps heavy on the stairs as he slipped into the guest room without a word. I could smell the alcohol on him, see the exhaustion in his face. Once I heard him talking on the phone, his voice raw with desperation. I'll get it, I swear. Just give me time. It was a different Jacob than the one I remembered from his youth. Gone was the boy who had run through the yard with a baseball glove, who had hugged me tight after his high school graduation. In his place was a man twisted by anger and poor choices, a man who saw me not as a father, but as a bank he had been denied access to. Then came the day he tried one last time. It was late afternoon, the sky dim with approaching rain. I was sitting in the living room when Jacob came storming in, his eyes wild, his hands shaking. I need money, Dad, he said, his voice hoarse. This is life or death. You don't understand. If I don't pay them, I'm finished. I stood slowly, meeting his desperate gaze. "Jacob, I cannot give you what you're asking for. I won't." His voice broke, rising into a shout. "You'd let your own son be destroyed? You'd rather cling to your pride than save me?" Tears stung my eyes, but I did not waver. "You've made your choices, Jacob. I begged you to change, to take responsibility, but you chose this path, and I will not let you drag me down with you." For a long moment he stood there trembling, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. Then, with a strangled cry, he turned and slammed out the door, disappearing into the gray evening. I never saw him again, not really. Word spread eventually that he had left town, chasing work in another state. Some said he found odd jobs, others that he fell deeper into debt. For me, it was enough to know that the storm had finally passed my door. The house was mine again, quiet, steady, safe. But peace carried a weight now, for though I had won the battle to protect my home and pension, I'd lost something else. I had lost the last fragile thread between a father and his son. The days after Jacob's departure felt different. The air in the house was still but no longer suffocating. For the first time in months, I could sit at my kitchen table without the weight of suspicion pressing against my chest. The kettle whistled, the clock ticked, and the quiet was mine again. I tended to the garden more often. The tomatoes had finally ripened, lopsided and stubborn, just the way Evelyn used to tease me about. I trimmed the hedges, mowed the lawn, even repaired a loose shutter that had rattled through the last storm. Each small task reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. This house was not just a structure of wood and brick. It was my sanctuary, built by decades of labor, love, and sacrifice. At night, I would sit in the armchair by the fireplace, Evelyn's photograph resting on the mantel. I spoke to her often as though she were still listening. "It's over, Eve," I told her one evening, the glow of the fire warming my face. "He's gone. He tried to take everything we built, but he couldn't. I stood my ground." There was pride in my voice, though sorrow lingered too. For all his faults, Jacob was still my son. A father never stops hoping, no matter how far a child strays. But I knew now that love did not mean surrender. Protecting him could not come at the cost of losing myself. Word trickled back eventually. Neighbors whispered that Jacob had burned bridges in town, that creditors had chased him until he fled across state lines. Some said he was working odd jobs, scraping by. Others claimed he had fallen further, deeper into trouble. I didn't know which was true, and perhaps it was better that way. I had changed the locks, secured my finances, and even drawn up new papers with the lawyer, clear instructions for the future should I ever falter. My pension, my home, my dignity, they were safe. More importantly, I had reclaimed something greater, my strength. One Sunday morning, I dressed in my best suit and walked down to the church on the corner. Neighbors greeted me warmly, their smiles genuine. Mrs. Henderson clasped my hand and said softly, "You look lighter, Harold." "Stronger?" And she was right. For months, I had felt like a man cornered in his own home, robbed of his peace. But now I stood tall again, shoulders square, head held high. Age had not broken me. Greed had not defeated me. That afternoon I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the sun dipping low in the sky. Children's laughter drifted down the street, mingling with the rustle of the wind in the trees. I closed my eyes, breathing in the peace that had returned. I thought of Jacob, not with anger, but with a quiet resignation. His choices were his own now. I had given him every chance, every warning, every ounce of patience a father could muster. In the end, he had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine. As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, I whispered softly, as though Evelyn were beside me, "I may have lost my son's respect, but I will never lose my self-respect." The words settled over me like a blanket, firm and steady, and in that moment I knew I had won. Not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with resolve. My life, my home, my dignity were mine to keep. It was not a loud victory. It was not the kind that filled headlines or turned heads. It was a quiet victory, but it was mine.